What's up, everybody? I hope you're fine today. I hope you're good wherever you are. So today's video is about Amos Wilson, and I believe Amos Wilson is a great legend amongst black folks, not only people from the United States, but also people who are also in Africa, as long as you understand what is called the black consciousness, as long as you understand who is a black person, as long as you understand the struggles that every black person faces across all the continent, not only in the United States, but predominantly this message was for black Americans. But until today, we find it so resonating with black folks across all the world. And this leads me to give you the speech by Amos Wilson that I want you to listen so carefully. And later on, I'll tell you something that I've learned from the speech that I believe that it is important. So let's watch the speech and learn some lesson. These are things which help us, reminds us. And the importance of this speech, it reminds you the things which are also important until today. Don't think that Amos Wilson is of a different generation, but everything that he says on the speech affects black people until today, 2024. Until then, let's watch the speech and learn something about it.
Thank you kindly for your invitation and your most warm reception. It's indeed a pleasure to be here with you to share this time with you this evening. And I appreciate you coming out, given the inclement weather, which I'm sure shows the degree to which you are committed to the liberation of our people and the movement of our people forward in this day and age. I also appreciate very much the subject matter you've chosen to this evening's lecture, and that is having to do with economics. To me, it indicates your recognition of a very, very important issue that is too often ignored in this community, and by the black community to its peril. We need to be engaging in many, many more discussions, symposia, and so forth concerning economic development as a people. And I think this evening I'm just going to basically do an outline in terms of our economic situation and in terms of our economic needs as a people. I'm not going to load you down with any statistics and so forth, but just sort of give an overview of the economic situation we're in and why we need to address that situation immediately. In the future, perhaps we will sort of fill in the spaces. The subject is very broad and it's very complex in the sense that there are many areas we need to discuss as a people in terms of economics. I advocate very clearly what I call a need for a national African-American debate and consensus relative to money and wealth and their relationship to African liberation, empowerment, and continuing survival. As a lecturer, I've noted often that I can get a pretty good response from an audience as long as I stay away from a discussion of power and a discussion of money among our people. You can almost cut the tension and the anxiety in the room when you start talking about money in front of our people and when you start talking about real power, along with challenging Europeans, along with the idea that we must overthrow the European. That somehow seems to put a bit of fear and anxiety in our people. And yet you must face that reality. You talk about racism and you complain about racism, and yet I don't think you really follow the discussion to its logical conclusion. We sort of talk about racism as if racism is something that exists by itself. You know, sort of what we call in psychology and philosophy, reification. You know, you can talk about the ego. And yet there's no place in the brain that we can designate as the ego, or the superego, or the id. There's no place in the brain that we can point out say this is the ego. And yeah, we talk about the ego, the id, this, that. And you have people talk about the economy. You know, if there's something called an economy that's operating separate from the activities of men. And you cannot have an economy without men, without people. An economy is people, you see. And so we talk about racism too, in a way as if it is something that sort of has a life of its own, as if it is not something practiced by people and by a certain people. You understand? Now, when you realize that racism is practiced by certain people who you can see and point your fingers at, you know, and put your hands on, you ultimately realize that you are not only fighting racism, but you are fighting a people. And ultimately, if you want to prevent racism from having the negative effects that it has on our people, it means you're going to have to gain the power to neutralize those people who perpetrated on us, which means ultimately you're going to have to challenge white power. You're going to have to put the white man, the European man, in a position not to practice racism. So otherwise you're playing games with your mind, and you're playing games with other people. You talk about racism as if there are no people, you know, real people behind it, and if it does not imply that you have to gain real power in the world to prevent people from practicing certain sort of things. We skirt around those issues. We skirt around the issue of money and wealth, and we skirt around the issue of power. And this has caused us tremendous problems, and it will cause us even greater problems in the future. Our refusal to deal with economics in a real sense and deal with money and wealth in a real sense means that we are vulnerable to biological annihilation on this earth. And I'm not being rhetorical, I'm being very literal. In other words, when we talk about money and wealth, we're talking about life and staying alive. And as I will point out later, we're not merely talking about earning a better salary, moving up one notch in the class system. We're staying alive. And our refusal as black people to confront the issue of money and wealth is going to end up with our very lives being threatened as a people on this earth. And therefore, we must have very frank and open discussions about it. I'm going to go through a number of reasons why I think we have problems with the issue of money and wealth. Obviously, I don't have time to cover them in detail. In the future, perhaps with the symposium, we can deal with them in detail. I have about a list of 20, so obviously I cannot give long explanations of each one. But we are caught in a paralyzing contradiction regarding money and wealth creation. A part of it is the result, I believe, of religious sentiments. You know, the love of money is the root of all evil. You know, we've been taught that one very well. So in a sense, I think many of us see the idea of talking about money in a very bold sense, structurally, directly, and somehow equivalent to engaging in some sinful discussion, almost as bad as talking about sex, I guess. And the idea then that money and the speaking of money represents something evil makes us avoid the issue. I want you to recall at this moment that Africans did not come across this ocean as Christians. And I know that, hurts some people's feelings, but you must face your historical reality. You were not Christians in Africa. And, I'm not attacking Christianity, I'm dealing with a historical situation here. You became Christians in America. To a great extent, that might have been one or two Christians, but in the general, no Christians. And to a good extent, that Christianity came through the auspices of our masters. very important that you look at that situation and confront the reality that people give you nothing, people in power hand you nothing that is going to do what? Overthrow their power. While you can believe in Christianity and you're welcome to believe in Christianity and it's authentic and real, you must differentiate between Christianity as a religion and as a faith and the use of Christianity as a tool by another group of people. And this is also the case with Islam and any other religion. You see, and I often have to confront this sometimes, because if you're not careful in defending your religious faith and your religion, you also end up defending the status quo, which was the intention of those who taught the religion to you. So then often in defending Christianity, we end up defending the white man's right to be on top and to rule over us. Just as many Muslims in defending Islam end up justifying the rulership of Africans by Arabs. And there's a difference between Arabism and Islam. And I don't think for a minute Islam justifies the ruling of Africans by Arabs, as I don't think for a minute Christianity justifies the ruling of black people by white folk. And I want you to be clear. I'm not talking about your religion, but I'm talking about what? Its use. And that people who teach it to you are not always concerned about your praising the Lord, but are concerned about how that religion is used to manipulate you and to maintain them in power. In fact, a gentleman spoke with me one evening after I alluded to this issue about a gentleman he worked for, a white gentleman he worked for. As I recall, he was a chauffeur for this gentleman. And the white gentleman was an atheist. Yet he, I believe, financed religious activities and religious proselytization in various communities. And he asked him, you being an atheist, how do you justify the supporting of religious activities and conversion of people to this religion? And the rich gentleman told him, well, I do it because I want to sleep in peace at night. You see? And of course, you can see the situation there. He saw that religion as a means of protecting his own wealth. So if you steal from the people, rape, rob them, enslave them, take their labor free for generation after generation, and then you teach them, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's ox. Isn't that wonderful? You see, because when they believe it and take it into heart, they will not even take back that which belongs to them. They will, in a sense, they will come to feel that they don't even have a right to the wealth that was theirs before this even happened. And therefore, the people who stole it can sleep well at night. How often, and this, to a good degree, is how religion has been sold to black people. And how it is used to maintain us in the position that we're in. So we have to be very careful about the way religion has been promulgated among us, for a reason to make sure that we do not fall victim to the game. In fact, I found it very interesting that whites can complain about crime in the streets and fear of being mugged and being hurt, even though they are not the primary victims of mugging, by the way. You would think, in terms of the news media, that whites were the greatest victims of so-called black crime. That the people who get raped most by blacks are black women. Who get mugged most by blacks are black people. It is our attack upon ourselves that is more the problem. But of course, the reverse picture is projected as if whites are being attacked by black people, and they are the major victims of black, so-called black crime. I find it very interesting that you have this group of people, I'm referring to whites there, who think that after enslaving our people, after raping and robbing and lynching and murdering, miseducating, discriminating, scandalizing, and all of the other things that they've done to African people, they think that they have a right to walk down the street in peace. It's amazing. I mean, just such arrogance that they can sleep at peace with their stolen and bloody wealth. It's an amazing arrogance on the part of these people. Amazing. And yet I warn them again and again, you'll never sleep in peace and you'll never walk the streets in peace. And every time you get stabbed in these streets, and every time you get mugged, you're paying for the sins of your fathers. And you will continue to pay for it. I don't care if the nice little innocent white girl or white boy says, I had nothing to do with slavery. You're going to pay for it anyway. For the sins of the first generations are visited on to us. They continue. Do not think that you can accept the wealth of your fathers and not at the same time accept the curse that goes with it. Until you repent and return that money back to the people from whom you stole it, right, you and your children will suffer regardless of their personal innocence or their good. You have to face it. I will also tell you something too, is black people getting mugged out here as well. It means we have some things too, as fathers, that we have not rectified as well. And we are being killed by our own children. And there's a reason for that. And one of them is the fact that we have not dealt correctly with our economic situation. And I'll get back to that momentarily. We often have identified wealth, poverty, and goodness. You know, poor but honest. And we somehow think being poor is more holy than being rich. You know, we got that syndrome too, that somehow, you know, God is just going to take all the poor people on earth and take them up to heaven. But stop and meditate on that for a moment, you know. A lot of these people out here who are mugging and robbing and so forth are not what? They're not rich. And poor people definitely are not sinless. And definitely are not any more saintly than hardly any other group of people. So the idea that somehow being poor means you're somehow better than another person, I don't think will hold up to serious thought and meditation. But I think we've been sort of fed that ideology, you know, that poverty and goodness and poverty and honesty and, you know, God's little poor people has been, you know, fed into us to a very great extent. Many of us, I think, are afraid to deal with money and to deal with the issue of wealth because we've been treated as commodities. We were sold as slaves. And I think we've associated in the slave experience with, of course, capitalism and with greed for money. Certainly we cannot deny that as a fact, but we cannot permit this trauma to our people to keep us from dealing with the real issue of wealth and the real issue of money and its place in terms of our empowerment and survival as a people. We cannot let this idea of the fact that we were treated as objects and sold as objects get in our way of dealing with the issue of the use of money to our own advantage. We also have come to see money as a natural white right. In the sense that we almost see the idea of white folk having money as a natural thing. And white folk being rich is, you know, just that's where it's supposed to be. And it's very ironic that we see it that way. And it creates a problem because we often do our first thing when it relates to us. We almost begin to see black people and wealthy black people as being unnatural, as not deserving the wealth that they have created. You see? And we see whites as, in a sense, being deserving. And we often see ourselves, we almost have the sense that we don't deserve money. We don't deserve wealth. Just like many of us have this feeling we don't deserve power. That's a white folks thing. You know, money is a Jewish thing, you know. It's everybody's thing but black folks' thing. This is a very, very dangerous concept. Because it often means we will admire a Donald Trump, or we will admire rich white folk, but we will envy wealthy black people. You see, the whole different attitude. Envy is a very bitter kind of attitude. Ultimately, it is a wish that the person falls from their state, and a hope that they do not continue to succeed, that they actually go into ruin. Very, very different kind of attitude. It means that often, instead of admiring, as we do with Donald Trump, wish to be like Donald Trump, when we look at our own, we have a sense almost to wish that that person loses what they have because somehow they don't deserve it. And on top of that, often, we make sure that we don't contribute anything to their wealth. I'm not going to get no Cadillac, you know, that kind of thing. You ain't going to get rich off my money. We don't mind, you know, all the other people get rich off our money. But for a black person to get rich off our money, that is the ultimate insult. You see, this is the ultimate. And often our businesses are defeated, and our attempts in business and so forth are defeated by this kind of attitude. We don't want to see the other one, any of each of us, the other of us move up in a different sort of position. And we'll overcome with envy and jealousy, and therefore we will destroy or not support many of our businesses. Even though white wealth is stolen wealth. White wealth is based on the use of the free labor of our parents, great-grandparents, and the parents before them, just completely stolen. Captive wealth, brutalized wealth, enslaved wealth. And somehow we still think they're deserving of the money. Amazing attitude. This wealth is based on the colonialization of African countries. The Industrial Revolution of Europe, based upon the molasses of Jamaica, based upon the sugar crops of the Caribbean. The wealth of the white South Africans and Europeans today, based upon the gold and diamonds and oil and minerals and everything else taken right out of the African continent, taken right out of the soils of our people in the Caribbean, Central and South America. And yet we have nerve enough to think that these people are deserving of that wealth. And we have nerve enough to think that we are undeserving and that it should not belong to us. What an insult to our own intelligence. But I have often stated that in order for us to be in the condition we are in as people, we literally have to be turned backwards. We have to think the very opposite of what would make us great as people and move us forward as people. The white man who is less than 10% of the world's population can only rule the world, and the other 90% through deception and lies. As I've indicated before, we can only be in the condition that we are in as one of the largest majorities on this earth if we are out of our minds. In other words, to be in the position that we are in as black people, we literally have to be crazy. And this is one of the major departures between an African psychology today and European psychology. You must recognize that being out of our minds is a political economic necessity for Europeans. How else do you explain then a group of people who live on a relatively small landmass, whose lands do not contain the bulk of the wealth of this world, and yet those people are perceived as rich and powerful and overfed, and the people who live over the world's wealth are seen as poor, poverty-stricken, and starving. A reversal. A complete reversal. I talk about often what I call the theory of racial complementarity. In the sense that if one race is to be efficiently exploited by another race, then the subordinate race must have a personality and behavioral orientation that complements the dominant race. In a sense, they have to fit like hand and glove. So then, if whites are active, blacks must be passive, you see. If whites are abstract thinkers and conceptual thinkers, then blacks must be concrete, functional thinkers, you see. If whites are analytical in their thought, and so forth, we must be global and diffuse in our thinking style. If whites have a high sense of racial and ethnic identity, we must be the ultimate individualists in the world. And you can go down this list and you will see then that the black personality is twisted in a mirror image of the white personality to maintain that system, which is one of the reasons, on another occasion I'll explain to you why black children have so many problems in these schools. Why there has been a black style developed and conditioned in this country, and how they're set up for failure. In the very areas that would threaten white power in terms of our ways of thinking, you will find our children having problems. Let me put it this way. I often say this: if you want to know the characteristics of black people and black children in a general sense, you only basically need to answer the question, what must be missing or present in the black personality that it maintains European power? Think about that for a minute. In other words, in order for the Europeans to stay in power, we have to have inbuilt in us certain characteristics, mental, psychological, social characteristics. And you stop and think then, what characteristics should we have in us that will keep them in power as people? Because remember, this is a minority. This is not a majority of people, this is a minority of people. And yet they have power over us. That means that, as I said earlier, our minds and our behavior and our orientation toward the world has to be set up in such a way that we, in a sense, maintain these people in their position of power. When you meditate on that question, you will see then those very characteristics that maintain Europeans in power will either be missing in our children or present depending on their nature. Let me make it more concrete. If thinking abstractly and conceptually among black people means that we would be able to look through the nonsense of these ads on TV, would mean that we would not become victimized by these emotional appeals so that we would want to kill each other over a pair of sneakers, or sell poison to our children to buy a BMW. And this kind of junk and gossip. You know, if you can follow a mugger after they mug you, chances are they're not going to pay rent with that money. Yeah, they're going to buy junk and gossip. that some TV show or somebody has shown them makes them something. That means you have to have a certain mentality for that. But the person who's able to sit there and look through that ad, to laugh at it and recognize the silliness of it, to recognize the game that's behind it, to resist it very well, that person is a threat to European dominance. The Europeans would fall if we didn't fall for those appeals. Therefore, what are you going to find most problematic in many of our children in schools? Conceptual thinking, abstract thinking, analytical thinking. If thinking technologically as a people and acting technologically means that we could ultimately challenge the IBMs, the AT&Ts, and other things of this world, then you are going to find that your children will have the greatest problems where? In mathematics, science, and technological thinking. Am I getting across now? Yeah. You know what I'm saying? If loving one another, if identifying yourself as African and relating to each other as African and thinking in terms of each other as African and behaving individually in terms of your African descent and relationship to other people means the overthrow of Europeans, you are going to have trouble in self-love and relating with one another and loving one another. If being able to trust each other, if being able to be reliable in your relationship with each other and keeping your word with each other and supporting each other means that you can then form a collective force, being a majority, against European power. One of the greatest problems you're going to have with each other is what? Trust. We must be what? Suspicious of each other. We must be what? Unreliable in our relationship one with the other. You see what I'm saying? In other words, the characteristics that are necessary to maintain the European system are bred into the African personality. That's why when I talk about the education of black children, you recognize that the education of black children resembles nothing like the education of white children. The whole curricular approach and the pedagogical approach would have to be different. Because we must put back into our children and into ourselves what has been taken out and what has been repressed if we are to liberate ourselves. But as I'm going to talk in a minute, many of us have bought this stupid idea called standard education and equal education. And it is the buying of those ideas, standard education, equal education, that we've been destroyed and will be destroyed as people. There's no such thing as equal education. No such thing as a standard education. And I talk to you, and there's no such thing as standard business. But we bought the concept. In fact, we'll engage in a discussion on education without even defining what we're talking about. We'll just assume education is what we've always been doing, what white folks have been doing all along. It doesn't occur to us that we need to redefine the whole concept. We need to ask ourselves why, for what purpose are our children reading? Why are they learning, man? You have a problem sometimes when your children come back and say, Daddy, why do I have to study this? So I have to come up with a reason other than what? Working for the slave master. Yeah, think beyond that. Think how often you said, so you can get a job. You know? And move so far beyond that. You know? And that creates problems. White wealth bestowment, we have been consigned the role of consumers in this system. We think of ourselves as consumers. Our purpose in this world, as far as the world system is concerned, is to buy. Not to produce, but to consume. We measure ourselves against whites in terms of the amount of consumption that we engage in. not in terms of production. We think that a man who drives a Cadillac is equal to the man that makes it. Yeah, and we confuse the two things. So we think we drive Cadillac like white folk, we live in houses like white folk, we eat like white folk, we talk like white folk, you know, we are like white folk. That's a lie. It's a cruel deception. You will never make it up in the world and gain any respect among people and have any power through consumption. You only gain respect and you only gain power through production, not through buying, ladies and gentlemen. No African nation or any group of people can buy themselves into respect and buy themselves into power. And you have leaders who misled you in many ways by comparing your income against white income. You see, a terrible misleading situation. Because income and wealth are not the same thing. You may have an income of $100,000 a year because you're getting a check of so much per month. That's quite different from a man who has an income based on the fact that he owns $10 million worth of property. You see, so when people are running the income game on you, because you know when you blow that check, when you get fired next month, you're done. That $100,000 of wealth is nothing. In fact, it is not even wealth. It ends right at that point. You see, but a man with $10 million worth of property, he's got a lot more resources and possibilities. You see, but our leaders have compared income instead of wealth. And this has created a tremendous problem with us. As a matter of fact, it is time for us now to question black leadership, period. You look at the condition that black people are in today, and crack, and unemployment, and homelessness, and all of the other kinds of things, and you basically have the same black leadership you've had for the past 30 years. It is about time for you to begin to question the validity of that leadership. If these people were running for president and so forth, you would have thrown them out of office a long time ago. Because you would say, hey, look at when you came in and look at where we are now. How can you validate your leadership looking at the concrete condition of our people? We don't call our leaders into task. You've been led by the NAACP, the Urban League, and various other so-called black organizations which are really not black and never have been from their inception, and have led to the situation where we are today, where economically we are suffering to a very great extent. We've had leaders who protested against our not being hired in places where we spend our money. But we haven't had leaders who have talked about what? Owning those places. I have a business here at 125th Street, and while I can appreciate adequate power struggles against discrimination in hiring, and that was a magnificent struggle he engaged in years ago, and finally getting blacks hired in those places. Yet I look at that same street today, and you can count on the fingers of one hand how many black people actually own anything on that street. Even though 95% of the customers on the street are black people. And yet you have a Charles Rangel and a bunch of others there who seem to have a little or no concern about that situation and deal with that situation. And we send them to Congress year after year after year after year. We have to check this kind of thing out. We have been run in by what we call non-economic liberalism. NAACP with no economic program, the Urban League with no economic program. I have a book here, a beautiful book. They put out a beautiful book every year. The State of Black America, 1988. They'll have the State of Black America, 1989. The state of, every year, State of Black America. Wonderful statistics. But no theory, no program. You see, no program at all there. And yet we permitted ourselves to let these people set policy for us. and we are reaping the results of it. They overran Washington, Booker T. Washington's program. They overran Marcus Garvey and others, and now we can see the result of it. We in fact believe in individual wealth as against group wealth. We are, in a sense, the only true Americans in America, white people. We really believe in that stuff. We really believe in individualism. And yet we are the most stereotyped people in the country. We are viewed as stereotypes by other people. We're rarely seen as individual by other people. And yet we are the most firm believers in individualism. It's a pity. Do your own thing. You do yours and I do mine. Beautiful. Because the reality is all other ethnic groups act in terms of their ethnicity. And the reality is America is a pluralistic society, not a society of individuals. The reality is that there is no individual power without group power. You cannot become an individual ultimately until your group becomes collectively strong. The reason why we see white people as individuals is because of white power. If they had no power and they were powerless, we just see them as a bunch of powerless poor people. You have some Negroes who play tricks on their mind that say, I don't see color. As if you're not seeing color matters. Because you don't see color means that someone else doesn't mean what? That somebody else don't see you as what? Colored. Yeah. So we think if we deny our color and deny ourselves as people of color, that somehow that miraculously means that the other people don't see us as possessing color. Stupidness. Terrible. And you'll see it almost all the time when a Negro is getting ready to give his money away to white folks or to justify not supporting African people. You'll almost hear that statement in America. I don't see color. You see? And I recognize that that's exactly the state of mind you have to be in so that other people can pick your pocket. You see, not seeing color. You can ultimately only gain individual strength through group strength. I talk to college students sometimes by saying, you know, many of you think that you're here at this college, particularly those predominantly white colleges and so forth, because you come from, you know, some big family, because you scored high on the SATs, because you studied hard and you stayed away from the parties and you did all of this. I'm right here at the great university you are here today. Lies. You think you're the first person that came from good families? You think you're the first generation that had good families? Black people have had good families from the beginning. You think you're the first generation that studied hard? You think you're the first generation of blacks who can score high on SAT exams? Yet I grew up in a generation of people where it didn't matter how high you could score in the exam, how much you had studied. There were just certain colleges you were not going to, period. Period. That was it. In fact, they didn't even give you the exam to take. Don't bother to apply. How did we get into those schools? Not because of the scores we made and so forth, but because blacks without degrees, the blacks who never seen the inside of a college and others, put their bodies on the line because of black power, because of the collective activity of black people. That collective activity then permits you as an individual now to have a choice of colleges. It permits you to choose your profession. It permits you to say, well, I'll be a computer engineer, I'll be this, I'll be that. But remember, that choice is based on what? Group power. And the willingness of the black group to back that right up. It is not a right that is inherent in you as an individual, and it is not a right that was just given to you simply because you were born or simply because you went to the right school.
All right.
And when those people in those universities and other places decide they want to take it back from you, it will have to be that black community again that will stand up and say no. And we forget that often. We got a lot of people now, they got a little position in the world, and they want to make it, they want to say it's all the result of their own individual assets. You see, no, it is group power that makes individual choice possible. Which means then that we try to increase our wealth and power as black people, we then must increase it in terms of increasing the power and wealth of the whole group. Or else, individual power and wealth is a mere illusion. I look at Johnson Publications, for instance, and I look at the difference between that magazine in the 60s and what it is today, and how in many ways it cannot deal with real issues in terms of black folk. And even though he may have millions of dollars, in a way there's a fundamental weakness there. Why? Because he cannot afford to do what? Insult his what? White advertising. So his wealth is really not what? Howard, as it would be among the others. His wealth, but in a way, his wealth is also his what? His weakness. I, being poor without anything, can say what I want to. If he had, though, a black nation doing business and creating wealth, he too could say what he wanted to say. Because he'd have that wealth and nation of people supporting what he had to say. But because he must depend upon another people, he cannot afford to insult them. And yet, when you deal with the real issues of black people, you must insult white folk. And so the idea that you can have individual wealth not tied up to the wealth of black people as a group is an illusion of wealth and an illusion of power. And yet many of us have bought into this kind of situation. So we got a lot of us trying to run this little individual game without understanding that it has to be all or none. We've got caught in our educational problem because we believe the white man is invincible, that he cannot be defeated. A miserable belief. All people and throughout history, all civilizations rise and fall. Many people ask me, why did we fall as black people? On a metaphysical level, if you're the first to rise, you'll be what? Basically the first to fall. That's the way life. Civilizations go through what? Cycles. There's not been one yet that has lasted for what? Forever. You had Romans, Greeks, Africans, this one and that one. And ladies and gentlemen, the white man is going to go one day too. I know you find it hard to believe. And I'm sure you could have convinced the Roman that one day the Roman Empire would be gone, or the Athenians that one day Athens would be gone, but they're gone. And yet somehow in our psyche, like people, we just kind of see you as what? Lasting forever. And indivisible and cannot be overthrown. The Japanese didn't think so. When you get that mentality then, you give up. We've been sold the idea of education as a solution to all our problems. Education is very important. And of course, I know many of you were raised with education. Fine, nothing wrong with it. Except that it is only a part of the solution. It is not the total solution. We, in a sense, ought to believe ourselves to be in eternal servitude. When I mentioned here earlier that when our children ask us why should they be studying math, or why are they studying this and that, about the only excuse we can give them for this so that they can get a job for other people. There's the assumption that somehow white people will always own everything and control everything, and therefore the best we can do is to qualify to work for them. But isn't there a higher motivation? Isn't there a higher cause when you say you're studying math so that you can overthrow white economic power? so that you can outthink those people, that you are at war with these people economically, socially, and militarily. And the reason why you are studying is so that we can win this struggle for our lives and survival as a people. If you really saw education not as a job market, not as a way of merely moving up on the social ladder, but as necessary to your very survival, then you wouldn't have as much problem as you have getting down to these schools, seeing that those children learn what they should learn.
Right on.
You see? But you have not yet come to the realization that education is about survival, not about jobs. I was talking to a friend of mine just before I left this afternoon, and he was talking about what a book he was reading called The Genetic Wars. How the Europeans have taken an African fever, dengue fever, and through gene splicing increased its potential, its dangerous potential, and how it could be sprayed on populations, so forth, and used on populations. I read an article in the Wall Street Journal, now maybe 2-3 years ago, long piece, that talked about the U.S. germ warfare research, where 23 American universities were engaged in that research. Also, the New York Board of Health.
So I feel like this video is so important until today because it addresses the challenges and opportunities that African Americans or Black Americans in general have. The struggles of Black people until today. Talk about systemic racism, how to cope up with unemployment opportunities, how to cope up with the works, how to cope up with Black businesses. These are things which affect us until today, where I believe that it is important for you to have learned and hear what he also says. While I listened to the speech, I also learned that he also provides some practical suggestions and solutions for achieving wealth and power for the Black community. He talks about some things which I really like, which are developing self-reliant economic system. Let's have our reliant economic system. And this is one of the things that I've always been telling you in one of my videos. We need to have a strong basis when it comes to our Black business, Black owned business, because you believe that Black people have higher purchasing power. Also, he talked about investing in education and technology. Very, very important for the Black community. You know, the educational disparities. For instance, people from the United States, we have the educational disparities between the whites and the Blacks. So if we Black people invest in education, it will give us knowledge and it will give us a platform to out what to think, since we are well endowed with the knowledge of the things that we are doing. He also talked about strong sense of identity and culture. We believe that we Black people should embrace our own culture, should be proud of our own culture, and let nobody bring us down and tell us that Black people doesn't have culture, especially African Americans, most especially who people see them as they don't have culture, but they should foster, they should render people, let them know that they have their own culture and should be respected just like any other culture. Also, he talked about importance of globalization, the role of media, the importance of leadership, the need for unity and solidarity. We Black people need to come together as one person. As I always tell you, the only thing a Black person got is his only brother, and that's the only thing that Black people are lacking. We Black people have resources, we Black people are knowledgeable, but you know one thing that we are still lacking today, which Amos Wilson was trying to emphasize on the speech. Amos Wilson was trying to emphasize this on the speech because we are very resourceful, we have higher purchasing power, but we don't get each brother. A Black person, it's not easy for them to support a Black business, whereas they will go and buy from other shops, which makes them lack unity. And Dr. Amos Wilson talked about unity and solidarity, and this is one thing that we need to have collectively as Black people. And with that, I hope that the speech helps you navigate the things which are happening in our lives today. Until then, peace, love, and harmony. Salute.